Who did this to you?" The old woman behind the counter froze. The coffee pot trembled in her hand. Every man at the diner turned to look at the biker in the Hells Angels vest standing over her. "Tell me his name," Jack said quietly. "Say it out loud." Her lips moved. No sound came out. Then barely a whisper, "The manager. He hurts me. Every single day." The whole room went dead silent. If you believe some people are worth standing up for, hit subscribe, follow this story all the way to the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The bell over the door of the Silver Moon Diner gave a tired little clank the way it always did, and nobody looked up. That was the first thing Jack Walker noticed. 14 people in that room, and not one of them lifted their eyes. In a town this small, on a highway this empty, a stranger walking in should have earned a glance, a nod, something. But every single person kept their head down over their plate, like they were afraid of what might happen if they looked around too long. Jack had ridden through 100 towns like Red Valley. He knew the difference between a quiet room and a scared one. This was a scared one. He let the door swing shut behind him. His boots were heavy on the cracked linoleum floor, and the leather of his vest creaked as he moved. 52 years old, blonde hair gone silver at the temple, blue eyes that had seen too much and forgiven most of it. On his back, stitched in red and white, 3 words that made strangers step aside on sidewalks before they ever heard him speak. "I didn't come in for trouble." He'd been telling himself that for 300 miles. He came in because his tank was running low, and his coffee thermos was empty, and his back was one bad pothole away from locking up completely. That was all. A meal, a cup of something hot, 20 minutes of sitting still. That was the plan. He slid into a booth near the window. The vinyl seat split open at the seam, yellow foam poking through like something trying to escape. He set his gloves on the table, and he waited. "Be right with you, hon." The voice came from behind the counter, young, tired, trying too hard to sound bright. Jack turned his head, and that was the moment. That was the moment the meal and the coffee and the 20 minutes of sitting still all went out the window. Because the young woman looked at him the way a rabbit looks at a shadow. She was maybe 26, blonde hair pulled back too tight like she'd done it in a hurry in the dark without a mirror. A name tag that said Emily pinned crooked over her heart. And when she smiled at him, because she did smile, she made herself smile. Jack watched the smile stop somewhere south of her eyes and never make it the rest of the way up. He'd seen that smile before. He'd seen it on soldiers who came home wrong. He'd seen it on women in courtrooms. He'd seen it once, a long time ago, on his own mother's face across a kitchen table when he was too young to understand what it meant. It was the smile of somebody who had learned that showing what you really felt only made things worse. "Coffee," Jack said. "Black, and whatever's hot back there." "Meatloaf's fresh," she said. "Well, fresh enough." "Meatloaf's fine." She wrote it down. Her hand was shaking. Not a lot. A stranger wouldn't have caught it. But Jack watched the pencil jitter against the little green pad, watched her steady it against the counter so he wouldn't see, and something old and cold turned over in his chest. "You okay, miss?" The question was gentle. He'd meant it to be gentle. She flinched anyway. "I'm fine," she said too fast. "Long shift, that's all." And then her eyes cut sideways quick. Involuntary, the way a person's eyes go straight to the thing they're most afraid of, toward the swinging door at the back of the diner. The kitchen door. It had a little round window in it, greasy and yellow with age. And behind that window for just a second, Jack saw a face. A man watching. Then the face was gone. Emily turned and walked away, fast coffee, pot in hand, refilling cups that didn't need refilling, keeping her back to the kitchen, and her body moving so that nobody, least of all the man behind the door, could catch her standing still. Jack very quietly and did what he'd trained himself to do over 30 years on the road. He watched. He watched the way Emily moved through that diner, and it told him everything. She had a route. He noticed it within 5 minutes. She never turned her back on the kitchen door. Never once. When she had to walk toward it, she took the long way along the counter so she could keep it in the corner of her eye. When she carried plates out from the kitchen, she came through fast shoulders up around her ears like a person walking under a ladder they expected to fall. He watched an old trucker 2 booths down waver over and press a folded bill into her palm. A good tip, generous the kind a man leaves when he can tell somebody's having a hard week. He watched her glance at the kitchen door, then slide the bill into her apron pocket instead of the jar by the register. And he watched the kitchen door open 20 minutes later, watched a man come out wiping his hands on a rag, and watched Emily go absolutely still. "Derek," she said, "just his name, careful, flat." "Where's the drop?" the man said. He didn't say it loud. That was the thing Jack noticed first. He didn't have to say it loud. He said it soft, almost friendly, the way you'd ask somebody to pass the salt, and Emily's whole body went smaller. "There wasn't much tonight," she said, "and it's been slow." "That's not what I asked." Jack turned his head slow and got his first real look at Derek Collins. I was younger than Jack expected, late 30s maybe. Soft in the middle, but with the kind of soft that used to be hard. Good haircut, clean shirt with the sleeves rolled up just so. The type of man who smiled a lot in front of customers, who called old ladies sweetheart, and remembered their grandkids' names, who left every stranger thinking what a nice young fella. But Jack wasn't a stranger to men like Derek. He'd known a dozen of them, 50 of them, and he knew that the friendly smile in the front of the house was the mask, and this soft, quiet, joyless voice by the kitchen door. This was the face. "The tip jars for everybody, Emily," Derek said. "We talked about this. You keep pocketing them, you're stealing from the team. You don't want to be a thief, do you?" "No," she whispered. "Then let's have it." Jack watched her reach into her apron. Watched her put the trucker's folded bill money that had been given to her by name for her into the hand of a man who had done nothing to earn it. Watched Derek's fingers close over it and disappear into his own pocket without so much as a thank you. "There," Derek said, patient, almost warm. "Was that so hard?" And he smiled at her. That was the part that made Jack set down his coffee cup very, very carefully, because his hand had started to want to do something his head hadn't authorized yet. Derek smiled at her, a soft, understanding smile, like a teacher with a slow child, and then he turned and walked back through the swinging door. Emily stood there for a second. Then she went to the far end of the counter, put her hand flat on the surface to steady herself, and Jack watched a single tear break loose and run down her face before she could catch it. She wiped it fast with the back of her wrist. She straightened up. She fixed the smile back on, and she came over to Jack's table with the coffee pot and said, "Warm you up, hon." Jack looked at her for a long moment. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. "Do what? Smile like that, not for me." Something cracked in her face. Just for a second. The smile slipped, and underneath it there was a whole life of things she'd never said out loud, and her eyes filled up again, and she said, "I don't know who did this to you." The words came out low and steady, and they landed like a stone dropped in still water. Emily's mouth opened. The coffee pot trembled in her hand. Down the counter, the old trucker stopped chewing. Somewhere behind them, a fork went quiet against a plate. The whole diner, which had spent the last hour pretending nothing was wrong, seemed to hold its breath at once. "Tell me his name," Jack said. "Say it out loud." And Emily Carter, 26 years old, who had learned to swallow every word she ever needed to say, looked toward that greasy little window in the kitchen door and said the truest thing she'd said in 2 years. "The manager, he hurts me. Every single day." The room went dead silent. Jack didn't move. That surprised her. He could see that it surprised her. She'd braced for something, for him to stand up, to shout, to slam through that kitchen door swinging. She'd probably braced for it because she'd seen what happened to the last person who tried to help. But Jack just sat there, both hands flat on the table, and he said very quietly, "Sit down a minute." "I can't. If he sees me sitting." "Sit down, Emily. I'll deal with what he sees." And something in the way he said it, not loud, not angry, just certain, the way a man sounds when he has decided a thing and the deciding is already done, made her slide into the booth across from him. She perched on the edge of the seat like she might have to run. "How long?" Jack said. "How long what?" "How long has he been doing this?" Emily looked down at her hands. They were red and cracked from dish soap and hot water. She was 26 and she had the hands of a woman twice that. 2 years, she said, since he took over. It wasn't like this before. There was another manager, an old guy, Mr. Foster. He was kind. He got sick. He had to leave. And they brought Derek in from one of the other locations, and at first, her voice caught. At first he was nice too. That's the part nobody believes. At first, they're always nice. "I believe you," Jack said. She looked up at him. "I believe you," he said again. "Keep going." So she did. She told him how it started small. a comment about her uniform, a joke in front of the other girls about how she couldn't do anything right, how he'd move her shifts around at the last second so she could never plan a doctor's appointment, never take a class, never build a single thing outside these four walls, how he'd hold her paycheck an extra day and act like it was an accident just to remind her he could. She told him about the tips, how it had started as we pool tips here, it's fairer, and turned into Derek deciding what fair meant and fair meaning. Most of it went to Derek. She told him about the threats, not the loud kind, the quiet kind. You know how many girls would kill for this job? You know I could replace you tomorrow. You know nobody's gonna hire a girl with an attitude problem, and that's what I'd have to write down, Emily, if you left. An attitude problem. And you needed the job, Jack said. I need the job. She said it in the present tense, and she said it like a fact she'd made her peace with, and that was almost the worst part. I don't have family here. My mom passed. My dad, I don't even know. It's just me. If I lose this, I lose the apartment. And if I lose the apartment, she stopped. There's no cushion. There's no soft place to land. There's just the ground. Jack nodded slowly. Why now? He asked. Why tell me you don't know me? I'm just some guy in a vest that scares people. Why say it out loud to me? Emily was quiet for a long moment. Because you asked, she finally said. In 2 years, you are the first person who ever asked. Behind the kitchen door, Derek Collins was watching. He'd caught at the biker stillness, Emily sitting down at a customer's booth, the way the whole room had gone quiet at once. Derek had built his whole small kingdom on being able to read a room, on knowing who was scared and who was scarable, and every instinct he had was lighting up now like an alarm. He pushed through the swinging door, wiping his hands on the rag, that front of house smile already sliding into place. Emily, there's tables need bussing. Warm, reasonable, a good manager keeping his staff on task. Sir, is there something I can help you with? Jack looked up at him. He didn't stand. He didn't need to. He just looked, and there was something in the look that made Derek's smile falter for half a second before he caught it and pinned it back up. Sit down, Jack said. I'm sorry, you heard me. Derek laughed. It was the laugh of a man used to laughing his way out of things. Sir, I don't know what she's been telling you, but she gets emotional. She's a good kid, but she can't handle pressure, and she tells stories when she's stressed. It's part of why I have to keep such a close eye on. Sit down, Derek. The name did it. Jack said his name, his actual name, the name Emily had spoken, the name that meant this stranger already knew who he was and what he'd done, and the color went out of Derek's face by a shade. He didn't sit, but he stopped talking. See, here's what I've been doing the last hour, Jack said, and his voice never rose, not once the whole time. I've been sitting in this booth, drinking your not very good coffee, and I've been watching. I watched you take a tip out of that girl's hand, money a trucker gave her by name. I watched you make her hand it over, and then I watched you smile at her about it, and Derek, that smile. That's the one that told me everything. I don't know what you think you saw. I know exactly what I saw. I've seen it my whole life. You want to know the funny thing about men like you? Jack leaned back. You always think the quiet ones can't fight back. You look at somebody like Emily, no family, no money, nowhere to go, and you think there's a safe one. There's somebody I can lean on, and she'll never push back because who would she even tell? And for 2 years you were right. He let that sit. But you made one mistake tonight. Derek's jaw worked. And what's that? You did it in front of me. The diner was silent. 14 people who'd spent an hour staring at their plates were now every single one of them watching. The old trucker had turned all the way around in his seat. A waitress by the register, another young woman older than Emily with tired eyes, had stopped pretending to fold napkins. Derek looked around the room, and for the first time he seemed to understand that the room wasn't on his side, that maybe it never had been. That maybe every one of these people had watched him do this 100 times and hated him for it and stayed quiet for exactly the same reason Emily had, because they had rent and no cushion and nothing but the ground. You need to leave, Derek said, and his voice had lost the warmth, now dropped into something harder. This is my restaurant. I'm calling the police. Jack Walker smiled for the first time all night. Good, he said. Call them. Let them hear everything. He picked up his coffee and took a slow sip. In fact, while you've got the phone out, you might want to call your regional manager too. because I've spent the last 2 hours doing more than watching Derek. And there's some folks who used to work here who've been waiting a long time for somebody to finally ask the right question. Derek's hand halfway to his pocket stopped. "What did you do?" he said. And Jack set down his cup and folded his hands and looked the man dead in the eye. "I asked around," he said, "before I ever walked in that door." Here's the part Derek Collins never saw coming. Jack Walker had not stopped in Red Valley by accident. He'd have let Emily believe it was chance, a low tank, an empty thermos, a tired back. It was kinder that way, and it was mostly true. But 3 days earlier, in 200 miles east, Jack had stopped at another diner, a truck stop off the interstate, and he'd fallen into conversation with a waitress on her smoke break out back. A woman named Carla, older, sharp-eyed, and when she'd learned he was headed west through Red Valley, something had crossed her face. "You stopping at the Silver Moon?" "Might. Why?" And Carla had looked at her cigarette for a long moment and said, "I used to work there, me and about 6 other girls. We all left, different times, different reasons." That's what he'd tell you, but it wasn't different reasons. She looked up. It was the same reason. It was always the same reason. Jack had listened. He was good at listening. And by the time Carla stubbed out her cigarette, he had 6 names, 3 phone numbers, and a slow, cold anger settling into his bones like a weather front moving in. He hadn't come to the Silver Moon for a meal. He'd come to see if it was true. And the moment he watched Derek Collins take a folded bill out of a shaking girl's hand and smile about it, he'd known that every word Carla said was true, and then some. "There's a woman named Carla Reyes," Jack said now, watching the recognition and then the fear move across Derek's face. "Ring a bell, and a Denise, and a girl named Kayla Real Young worked here a summer before she couldn't take it anymore and moved back to her mother's. 3 of them are on the phone with me right now, well, with a friend of mine who's writing everything down. They've been waiting 2 years for somebody to make it worth the risk to talk. They were all scared of the same thing Emily's scared of." Jack tilted his head. "That nobody would believe them. That it'd be their word against yours, one scared girl at a time, and you'd win every time because that's how it works. One at a time you win." He leaned forward. "But it's not one at a time anymore, Derek. It's 7 at once. And 7 women telling the same story about the same man. That's not a story anymore. That's a pattern. And patterns are what get investigated." Derek's mouth had gone dry. You could see it. He kept swallowing. "You can't prove anything," he said, but the words came out cracked. "I don't have to prove anything," Jack said. "I'm not a cop. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a man who asked a question in a room full of people who all know the answer." He gestured easy around the diner. "Look around. You've spent 2 years teaching all these folks to keep their heads down. But heads down only works when everybody thinks they're the only one. The second they find out they're not," he spread his hands. "Well, look at 'em now." And Derek looked. The old trucker was staring at him with open disgust. The tired-eyed waitress by the register had crossed her arms. A retired couple in the corner booth folks, who'd probably eaten here every Sunday for a decade, were watching him with the particular anger of people who realized they'd been polite to a monster for years without knowing it. And Emily. Emily was still sitting in the booth across from Jack. But she wasn't hunched anymore. She wasn't watching the kitchen door out of the corner of her eye. She was sitting up straight, and she was looking directly at Derek Collins, and there were tears on her face, but they weren't afraid tears. They were the other kind, the kind that come when a weight you've carried so long, you forgot it was even a weight finally lifts. "You want to know the thing you never understood, Derek?" Jack said, and he stood up now, unhurried, and he was tall, and the vest creaked, and the whole room seemed to lean back. "You thought her quiet meant she was weak. You spent 2 years mistaking her silence for surrender." He looked down at Emily, and his hard face softened just for her. But she wasn't surrendering. She was surviving. And you don't survive 2 years of a man like you by being weak. You survive it by being stronger than anybody in this room ever gave you credit for. He turned back to Derek, including you. Derek Collins made one last try. Cornered men usually do. Jack had seen it 100 times the moment when the mask is gone, and there's nothing left underneath but the frightened, grasping thing that had been wearing it. Derek's face twisted, and the friendly manager and the quiet tormentor both fell away, and what was left just looked around the room for one more angle, one more lie, one more person he could lean on hard enough to make this all go away. "She's lying," he said loud now to the whole room. All of you, you've known me for years. You're gonna believe some drifter in a gang vest over the man who's fed this town every day for 2 years. He walks in here off the highway and you're just gonna, I believe her. It was the tired-eyed waitress by the register. She was maybe 40. She had her arms crossed and her chin up, and her voice shook when she said it, but she said it. I believe her, Derek, because you did it to me too. 2 Christmases ago. You told me nobody'd hire a woman my age with a bad reference, and I believed you, and I've been scared of you every single day since. She swallowed hard. I'm not scared right now. I don't know why, but I'm not. And the old trucker turned around fully and said, I've been leaving that girl good tips for a year because I could see she was in trouble. Watched you take 'em too. Thought it wasn't my business. His jaw tightened. Guess I was wrong about that. One by one, the heads that Derek had spent 2 years training to stay down came up. The retired couple. The line cook who'd pushed the kitchen door open and stood in the frame with a spatula still in his hand and an expression that said he'd been waiting a long time for this. A young mom in a corner booth with her toddler who'd seen more than anyone realized. One by one, they looked at Derek Collins, and one by one, the fear he'd built his little kingdom on cracked and fell away, and there was nothing holding him up anymore. There never had been. Fear was all he'd ever had. Derek looked at Jack, and whatever he saw there, whatever a lifetime on the road and a slow, patient, unshakable certainty looked like, on a 52-year-old face, it was the end of him. What do you want? Derek said. Small now, beaten. What is it you want from me? Jack was quiet for a moment. I want 3 things, he said, and you're going to do all 3 tonight in front of these witnesses because the alternative is you explaining all of this to the police and your regional manager and 7 women with the same story, and I don't think you want that. Do you? Derek said nothing, which was a yes. 1, Jack said, you're going to give that girl back what you took, every tip. You've got a pocketful right now, and I'd bet you've got a coffee can somewhere in the back with a whole lot more. All of it. Tonight. Derek's hand went slow to his pocket. 2, Jack said, you're done here. You're going to call your regional manager first thing in the morning, and you're going to resign, and you're going to do it clean. And if I hear you gave Emily a bad word on your way out, 1 bad word, Derek, Carla, and Denise, and Kayla, and all the rest are going to make sure your name follows you to every diner from here to the coast. You understand? Yeah. And 3, Jack's voice dropped, and this was the only time all night it carried anything like a threat, and it was all the more terrible for how quiet it stayed. You're never coming back here. Not for a meal, not for a coffee, not to say goodbye. This place, this girl, these people, they're behind you now. You made your kingdom out of scaring folks who couldn't fight back. He leaned in close, and it turns out they could. They just needed one person to ask. The diner was so silent you could hear the old refrigerator hum. Derek Collins reached into his pocket, and with a hand that had started at last to shake the way Emily's had shaken all night, he pulled out a folded roll of bills, and he set them on the table in front of the girl he'd spent 2 years trying to break. Emily didn't touch the money. She just looked at it, and then she looked up at Jack, this stranger, this frightening-looking man in the vest that had made her go rabbit still an hour ago. This man who had walked in off the highway, wanting nothing but a meal, and had somehow quietly, without raising his voice one single time, torn down the whole architecture of her fear in the span of an evening. Why, she said, her voice was barely there. Why would you do this? For me? You don't even know me. Jack picked his gloves up off the table. He tucked them into his belt, and he looked at her for a long moment before he answered. Because a long time ago, he said, there was a woman who sat at a kitchen table with a smile she didn't mean, and a man who made her go quiet whenever he walked in the room. And I was 7 years old, and I didn't have the size or the words or the first idea how to help her. He was quiet a second. I've got him now. Little late for her, but I've got him now. Emily's eyes filled. Take the money, Jack said gently. It's yours. It was always yours. Derek Collins was already moving toward the door, hunched, hurrying, a smaller man than the one who'd walked out of that kitchen an hour before. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a word. The bell over the door gave its tired little clank as he pushed through it into the dark, and the sound of it. That same sound nobody had looked up for when Jack walked in made every head in the room turn to watch him go, and then he was gone. And the Silver Moon Diner, that faded, cracked, half-dead little place where a young woman had learned to cry so quietly that in 2 years not one soul had heard her. The Silver Moon Diner let out a breath it had been holding for a very long time. The tired-eyed waitress by the register put a hand over her mouth. The old trucker started to clap slow, and then the retired couple joined him, and then the line cook, and then the young mom, and then all of them, the whole room, all of them, clapping, not loud, not wild, just steady and real and full of something that had been buried under fear for so long that some of them had forgotten they still had it in them. Emily Carter sat at the middle of it with tears running down her face and a folded roll of her own stolen money in front of her, and for the first time in 2 years, she was not afraid. Jack Walker pulled his gloves back on. "I'd stay for that meatloaf," he said, and there was the ghost of a smile on his hard face. "But I've got a feeling it's cold by now." Emily laughed. It came out of her half-sob, half-laugh, surprised like she'd forgotten the sound. "I'll make you a fresh one," she said. "On the house, please. Just don't go yet." Jack looked at her, and for reasons he couldn't have explained, he sat back down, because he'd learned one more thing over 30 years on the road. One more thing besides how to tell a quiet room from a scared one. And it was this: the moment somebody finally isn't alone is not a moment you ride away from. It's a moment you sit with. So he sat, and outside on the empty highway, the desert wind moved through the dark, and the faded sign of the Silver Moon Diner flickered once, twice, and then for the first time in a long time held its light steady against the night. But Jack Walker knew something Emily didn't know yet, sitting there wiping her eyes and laughing for the first time in 2 years. Getting rid of Derek Collins was the easy part. The hard part, the part that would take everything Emily had and a few things she didn't yet know she had, was just about to begin. The fresh meatloaf never got made that night, because before Emily could even stand up from the booth, the phone behind the counter started ringing, and something about the sound of it made her go still all over again. "That's the office line," she said. "Nobody calls the office line at night." "Don't answer it," the tired-eyed waitress said quickly. Her name was Sandra, Jack would learn. Emily don't, but Emily was already up. 2 years of training didn't wash off in one good evening. When a phone rang, you answered it because the man who might be calling had taught her that not answering had a price. She crossed to the counter and picked it up before Jack could say a word. Silver Moon. Jack watched her face. He'd gotten good over the last hour at reading Emily Carter's face. He watched it go from cautious to confused to something worse. This is Emily. A pause. No, he's Derek's not here right now. Her eyes came up and found Jack's across the room. "Who is this?" She listened for a long moment, and the color drained out of her the same way it had drained out of Derek's an hour before. "Okay," she said. "Okay, yes, I understand." She set the phone down very carefully like it might go off. "Who was it?" Jack said. "The owner." Emily's voice had gone flat and small. "Not the regional guy, the actual owner, Mr. Holloway. He owns 4 of these diners." She swallowed. "He said Derek already called him 20 minutes ago, from his truck." The room went quiet again. Jack felt it before he heard the rest, that cold weather front feeling settling back into his bones. "What did Derek tell him?" Jack said. "That there was an incident tonight, that a member of a criminal biker gang came in and threatened him, assaulted a manager, extorted money out of the register in front of witnesses, and forced him to resign under threat of violence." Emily's hands had started to shake again, and Jack hated the sight of it, hated that Derek could reach into this room and do that to her from a truck on a dark highway miles away. "Mr. Holloway's driving in from Flagstaff. Right now. Tonight. He said nobody leaves. He said he's calling the sheriff on the way." Sandra made a small sound. The old trucker set down his coffee, and Jack Walker sat there and understood with the slow clarity of a man who has walked into more traps than he'd like to admit that Derek Collins had not run away beaten at all. Derek Collins had run away to rewrite the story. "He's smart," Jack said quietly, almost to himself. "I'll give him that. He's smart." "You mean?" Emily was gripping the edge of the counter. "Jack, if the sheriff comes and Derek's already told him He got ahead of it," Jack said. "That's what men like him do. See, in there tonight, he lost. In front of everybody, he lost, and he knew it. So he didn't fight the part he couldn't win. He walked out. And the second he was clear, he picked up the phone and started building a different room, a room where he's the victim and I'm the animal that walked in off the highway, and where you, Emily," Jack looked at her steadily, "where you're just a scared kid who got manipulated by a dangerous man into making false accusations. You see it, he's already got a story that saves him. And it's a good story. It's the story people expect when they see this vest. Nobody said anything because it was true and they all knew it was true, and half of them had thought exactly that story when Jack first walked in the door. So what do we do? Sandra said. Jack was quiet for a second, then he stood up. We tell the truth, he said, louder than he did. He turned to the room to all 14 of them, the trucker and the retired couple, and the young mom and the line cook still standing in his kitchen doorway with the spatula. That man's about to walk in here with the owner and a sheriff, Jack said, and he's going to tell them I'm a criminal who robbed the register and terrorized a manager. And every one of you saw exactly what happened. You saw him take a girl's tips out of her hand. You saw me never raise my voice. You saw him leave that money on the table himself, and you saw why. He paused. The question is whether you'll say it, because it's easy to clap when he's already gone. It's a whole different thing to say it to a sheriff's face while it's on the record. The room went very still, and this was the thing Jack understood that they didn't, not yet. He was asking them to do the exact thing Derek had spent 2 years teaching them never to do. Speak up. Put your name on it. Stand where he could see you. For a long moment, nobody moved. The old trucker was the first. He stood up slow, joints creaking, and hitched his belt and said, "Name's Earl Dunn. I've ate here 3 times a week for 6 years. I'll tell any sheriff you want exactly what I saw." He looked around at the others. "And I'll tell him I'm ashamed it took a stranger to make me do it." Sandra stood next. Sandra Wills, 12 years. Her voice shook, but her chin didn't drop. "I'll say it." The line cook stepped fully into the room. "Miguel, I've cleaned that coffee can out for him 100 times. I know exactly how much he took and where he kept it." He set the spatula down on the counter. "I'll show him." One by one, the room stood up, and Emily Carter watched it happen, watched a dozen people who had been afraid for years find their feet all at once, and something moved across her face that Jack had not seen there all night. Not fear, not relief. Something closer to disbelief. Like a person who's been told her whole life that she's alone, watching the proof of it fall apart in front of her eyes. "You did this," she whispered to Jack. "No," Jack said. "They did. I just asked." The owner got there first ahead of the sheriff. Emily heard the car before she saw it, a big engine moving too fast on the desert road, gravel spitting under the tires as it swung into the lot. She'd braced herself the whole time they waited, and Jack had watched her brace, and he'd said only one thing to her in the 20 minutes before the headlights came. "When he comes in, you don't have to be the strong one. That's not your job anymore. You just have to be honest. Let the room be strong for a change." She'd nodded. She wasn't sure she believed it. The door slammed open and Holloway came in like weather. 60s, heavy expensive coat. The kind of man who owned things and was used to that meaning. Something the second he walked into a room. His eyes swept the diner and landed on Jack, and Jack watched the man's whole face harden into a decision that had clearly already been made 200 miles ago in a phone call. "You," Holloway said. "You're the one. I'm the one who was drinking coffee, yeah. Save it. Derek told me everything. You know I've got a sheriff 20 minutes out. You know what extortion carries in this state. You know what it means to threaten a man for his—" "Mr. Holloway." It was Emily. She'd stepped out from behind the counter, and Jack saw what it cost her, saw 2 years of "don't speak, don't be seen, don't give him a reason," fighting against every word. But she stepped out anyway, and she said his name. And Holloway stopped mid-sentence and looked at her like he was seeing a piece of furniture talk. "You're the waitress," he said. "Carter, Derek told me about you too. Said you've been unstable. Said you've been stealing from the tip pool for months, and he was about to write you up, and that's what this is really about." The words hit her like a slap. Jack saw her flinch, saw the old reflex kick in. He's right, agree with him. Make yourself small. It's safer. He almost stepped in. He didn't have to. "That's a lie," Emily said. Her voice cracked on it. But she said it. "Mr. Holloway, I have poured coffee in this diner for 2 years. And in 2 years, I have never once told you a lie because Derek made sure I was too scared to say anything to you at all. He answered the phone when you called. He made me hide in the back when you came for inspections. You've met me maybe 4 times, and every time he stood right beside me so I couldn't say a word." Her eyes were wet, but her voice was climbing, finding something. "Ask yourself why. Ask yourself why a manager keeps a waitress away from the owner for 2 solid years. It's not because I'm unstable, it's because I knew things, and he knew I knew. Holloway's certainty flickered. Just a hair, but Jack saw it. He took my tips, Emily said. Every night, he took Sandra's, he took Miguel's. There's a coffee can in the back office right now on the shelf behind the ordering binder. And if you go look in it, you'll find more cash than any tip pool in a diner this size should ever hold. Go look, right now, before the sheriff comes. I'll wait right here. She lifted her chin. I'm not going anywhere. I've got nothing to run from. Do you notice that, Mr. Holloway, I'm the one who's not running? Ashing. The room held its breath. Holloway stood there, caught between the story he'd driven 200 miles to believe and the girl standing in front of him who did not sound remotely like an unstable liar. Jack had seen this exact moment on 100 Faces, the moment a man realizes the version of events he committed to might not survive contact with the truth. Coffee can, Holloway said slowly. Behind the ordering binder, Miguel said from the counter. I'll take you. I'm the one who had to keep it filled. Holloway looked at the cook, looked at the trucker standing, looked at Sandra with her arms crossed, looked at the whole room standing waiting, none of them acting remotely like people who'd been terrorized by a biker into a lie. He looked in short at a room that did not match the phone call. Show me, he said. Miguel led him back through the swinging door. The whole diner waited, and Jack didn't move, and Emily stood exactly where she was with her hands trembling at her sides, refusing to sit, refusing to shrink, because she'd said she wasn't going anywhere, and by God, she was going to still be standing there when that man came back. It didn't take long. When Holloway came back through the swinging door, he was holding the coffee can, and the look on his face had changed entirely. He set the can down on the counter with a heavy metallic thud, and he pried off the plastic lid, and he turned it so the room could see. It was stuffed. Rolled bills, rubber-banded stacks, loose singles, crammed down the sides. Far more than a slow night tip pool, far more than a fair one. 2 years of a shaking girl's money and Sandra's and Miguel's, and a half-dozen women who'd left before them. There's a name written on the bottom of the lid, Holloway said. His voice had gone strange. In marker, it says DC's retirement. He looked up. That's a joke, right? He wrote his own initials on it, like it was funny. He thought it was funny, Sandra said quietly. He used to say it out loud. When he took mine. Holloway stared at the can for a long moment, and Jack watched a man's entire understanding of his own business rearrange itself in real time, watched him realize that for 2 years in a diner, he owned under his own name a man he'd trusted had been running a small, quiet machine of theft and fear, and that the only reason he never knew was that the machine was built specifically to keep him from knowing. He called me, Holloway said, almost to himself. 20 minutes ago, panicking, told me to get here fast, call the sheriff, that there'd been a robbery. He looked up, and his eyes found Jack's, and something in them had gone from anger to something a lot more uncomfortable. He wasn't calling me to report a crime. He was calling me to get ahead of one. Yeah, Jack said. He was in. And then the sheriff's headlights swung across the windows. Emily's stomach dropped all over again because here it was the real test, the moment Jack had warned her about, the moment where a story told to a sheriff went on the record and became true or false forever. And Derek had told his story first. Derek always got ahead of it. That was his whole gift. The deputy who came through the door was young, careful, hand not on his weapon but not far from it, either eyes going straight to the man in the Hells Angels vest exactly the way Jack had known they would. Behind him came an older man, the sheriff himself. Gray mustache, unhurried, the kind of lawman who'd worked a small county long enough to have learned that the loudest story is usually the wrong one. Got a call about an assault and a robbery, the sheriff said. Manager of this establishment says a member of an outlaw motorcycle club threatened him and cleaned out the register. His eyes settled on Jack. That'd be you, I take it. That'd be the story he told you, Jack said. It's not what happened, but I understand why you'd start with me. The sheriff studied him. You want to tell me what did happen? No, Jack said. I don't, because if I tell it, it's one man's word, and I'm the man in the vest, and you've already got a version in your head that fits this vest better. So I'm not going to tell you anything. He gestured at the room. They are. And this was the twist Derek Collins had never planned for the thing. His whole clever head start couldn't account for. He'd built his lie for a room where Emily stood alone, and Jack stood alone, one frightened girl and one scary stranger against the smiling manager everybody trusted. One at a time, he always won. He'd said it himself in his own way 100 times. But the room wasn't one at a time anymore. The sheriff took out a notepad and one by one they came forward. Earl Dunn, 6-year regular, told exactly what he saw and didn't leave out that he was ashamed of staying quiet. Sandra Wills, 12 years, told about the coffee can and the Christmas threat 2 years back. Miguel walked the sheriff through the back office. The retired couple, the Hendersons, who'd eaten Sunday dinner here for a decade, said they'd watched Derek belittle that girl a dozen times and never understood until tonight what they were seeing. The young mother, quiet in the corner, said she'd seen him take money out of the girl's apron more than once and had always felt something was wrong. And then Emily. The sheriff turned to her last, and he'd softened by then the way a man does when a story he was handed starts falling apart in front of him. "And you're the waitress the manager mentioned. Miss Carter. He says you've been stealing, says you're unstable." "I know what he says," Emily said. "He's been saying it to me for 2 years. She took a breath. "You want to know if I'm unstable, Sheriff? Look at me. I'm the only person here who didn't get to leave. Everybody else in this room can walk out that door and never come back. I can't. This is my job. This is my rent. And I still stood here and told you the truth, knowing that if you believe him instead of me, I lose everything." Her voice didn't shake this time. "Does that sound like a scared little liar to you? Or does that sound like somebody who's just tired of being afraid?" The sheriff looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed his notepad. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "That does not sound like a liar." Holloway drove out to find Derek himself. He didn't have to go far. Derek hadn't run for the county line the way a guilty man should have. He'd only gone as far as a gas station 8 miles up the road, and he was still sitting in his truck in the lot, working the phone, no doubt trying to get ahead of whatever came next, because getting ahead of things was the only move he had ever known. What happened out there, Emily only heard about later. But she heard that Holloway got out of his car with the coffee can in his hand and set it on the hood of Derek's truck, and that Derek's whole face came apart when he saw it, and that whatever Derek tried to say, that it wasn't what it looked like, that the girl was lying, that the biker had planted it, that everybody was against him. None of it landed because Holloway had already stood in that room and seen the thing Derek's phone call had been built to keep him from seeing. She heard Holloway told him he was done. Not just here, that Holloway owned 4 diners and a lot of friends who owned more, and that Derek Collins's name was going to be a hard one to work under for a long time. And she heard that Derek, at the very end, when he had nothing left to lose and no story left to tell, had said one last thing. Holloway told it to her himself later because he thought she deserved to know. Derek had said she was nothing when I got her. She'd be nothing without me. And Holloway had looked at him and said, "Then how come the whole room stood up for her and not one single soul stood up for you?" Derek hadn't had an answer for that. There is no answer for that. By the time all of it was over, the sheriff gone, the statements taken Holloway back from the gas station with the story finished for good. It was past midnight and the Silver Moon Diner was empty, except for the people who worked there, and the man who'd walked in for a meal he still hadn't eaten. Holloway found Emily behind the counter wiping it down out of pure habit because her hands didn't know how to be still, even when the reason for their fear was gone. "Miss Carter." She looked up, braced, the old reflex still there. It would take a while to lose it. Some things you don't put down in a night. "I owe you an apology," Holloway said, and it clearly wasn't a thing he said often because it came out rusty. "I drove in here ready to have you arrested on the word of a man who was robbing me blind. I looked right at you and called you a liar in your own workplace, and you stood there and told me the truth anyway." He shook his head. "You know how many managers I've got across 4 locations who'd have done that, stood their ground with the owner staring them down, everything on the line." Emily didn't answer. She didn't know where he was going. "Not many," Holloway said. "Turns out, not many at all." He looked around the diner, the cracked booths, the faded everything, the tired little place that ran on a dead man's memory of what it used to be, and then he looked back at her. "I've got a hole to fill here," he said, "as of about an hour ago, and I've been standing in this room for the last hour watching how everybody in it looks at you. The cook, the regulars, Sandra, who's got 12 years on you and just spent an hour saying she'd follow your lead." He paused. "That's not something you can hire, Miss Carter. That's not something I can promote into a person. You've either got it or you don't, and I just watched you have it in the worst hour of your professional life. Emily's hands had gone still on the counter. I don't understand, she said. I'm asking if you'll run it, Holloway said. The Silver Moon, as manager. Real manager. Your name on the door and a salary, and the authority to build this place back into whatever you think it ought to be. He gestured at the room. God knows it needs building back. For a moment, Emily just stared at him. And then quietly, without meaning to, she started to laugh, that same broken, disbelieving laugh Jack had heard from her earlier. The sound of a person whose entire understanding of her own worth was being rewritten faster than she could keep up. Mr. Holloway, she said, an hour ago you thought I was an unstable thief. An hour ago I was a fool, he said simply. I'd rather be a fool who fixes it than a fool who doesn't. What do you say? Emily opened her mouth, and then she closed it. And Jack, watching from the booth where he'd sat all night, saw the exact thing he'd been afraid of cross her face. Saw 2 years of you're nothing, you're replaceable. You couldn't handle pressure rise up inside her all at once. Saw every cruel thing Derek Collins had ever poured into her come flooding back at the precise moment she was being handed the opposite. Because that's the cruel trick of it. Getting rid of the man who tells you you're worthless doesn't undo the years you spent believing him. Emily was standing in front of the best moment of her life, and the voice in her head was Derek's telling her she'd fail, telling her she wasn't ready, telling her she'd only prove him right in the end. I can't, she said. It came out barely a whisper. Mr. Holloway, I appreciate it, I do, but I've never managed anything. I don't know how to do payroll. I don't know how to order. I don't know how to, I'd sink it. I'd sink the whole thing, and then I'd have taken your diner down too, and I can't do that. And that's when Jack Walker finally got up out of the booth. He crossed the room, slow gloves in his belt, and he came and stood beside her at the counter, and he didn't touch her, didn't crowd her, just stood there, the way he'd stood in that room all night, solid, unhurried, certain. Emily, he said, look at me a second. She looked at him. Her eyes were wet again, but this time it was a different kind of drowning, not fear, but the terror of being offered something after you've spent years being taught you deserve nothing. An hour ago, Jack said, a man drove 200 miles here to have you arrested. He told a sheriff you were unstable. He told the owner you were a thief. Derek got ahead of you, got ahead of all of us, built a whole story with you, cast as the liar. He held her eyes, and you took it apart. Not me. You. You stood in front of the man who signs your checks, and you called him wrong to his face when you had everything to lose. You walked that sheriff through the truth. You didn't run, and you kept saying you weren't running, and you were right. You were the only one in this room who couldn't leave, and you were also the only one who never once looked at the door. He let that sit. You did all of that, tonight, with no title, no salary, no authority, and no idea if it was going to work. Emily's chin trembled. And now you're going to stand here, Jack said gently, and tell me you can't run a diner after what you just ran. The room was silent. Sandra had a hand pressed to her mouth. Miguel had stopped wiping the counter. Holloway watched. Derek spent 2 years telling you what you couldn't do, Jack said. And you believed him because when somebody says a thing to you every single day for 2 years, it stops sounding like his voice and starts sounding like yours. I know that. I know exactly how that works. Something old moved behind his eyes, quick gone. But here's what I need you to understand, Emily, and then I'll shut up and let you decide. Everything Derek said you couldn't do, you just did the hardest version of it tonight in front of all these people. The ordering, the payroll, all that, that's nothing. That's forms. Anybody can learn forms. He tapped the counter once. The part that can't be taught, standing up when it costs you everything and getting a whole room to stand up with you, you've already got that. You had it the whole time. Derek knew you had it. That's why he worked so hard to keep you from finding out. Emily stared at him. You survived him for 2 years, Jack said. You know what somebody who survives that already knows how to do. What? She whispered. Lead, Jack said. You just don't know it yet. But everybody in this room does. Ask them. And Emily Carter turned slowly and looked at the room. At Sandra, 12 years her senior, who nodded at her without a word. At Miguel, who said, I'll cook for you over anybody, Jaffa. At Earl Dunn, who said, I'll bring the whole trucking company through here. You just say when. At Holloway, who stood by the door with the coffee can under his arm and an offer still on the table. At all of them standing the way, none of them had been able to stand for 2 years until a stranger walked in off the highway and asked one quiet question. And something in Emily Carter, some small buried thing that Derek Collins had spent 2 years stepping on and had never quite managed to kill, lifted its head. She turned back to Holloway. Her hands had stopped shaking. "If I do this," she said, and her voice was steadier now, steadier than it had been all night, "I do it my way. Nobody's tips ever get touched again. Nobody in this building is ever scared to speak to you, and that back office door stays open. Open, always. Because a closed office door in this diner is how the whole thing started." Holloway looked at her for a long moment. Then for the first time since he'd come through the door like weather, the big man smiled. "Miss Carter," he said, "I think that's the best pitch for a job I've heard in 30 years. He crossed the room and held out his hand. "Welcome to management." And Emily Carter, who 2 hours ago had been crying so quietly behind a counter that in 2 years not one soul had heard her, reached out and shook the hand of the man who owned the place as its manager in front of a room full of people who had stood up for her. She didn't cry this time. She just held on firm the way Jack had shaken Derek's certainty apart all night, and she said, "Thank you, I won't waste it." "I know you won't," Holloway said. And across the room, Jack Walker picked his gloves back up out of his belt and thought that maybe finally he could get on the road. He was wrong about that too, because Emily wasn't done with him yet, and neither was the Silver Moon Diner, which had one more thing left to give up before the night was through. Something buried in that back office behind the coffee can. Something with Emily's own name on it that not even Derek had known was there. It was Miguel who found it. He'd gone back into the office to put the coffee can somewhere safe until Holloway decided what to do with all that money, and he'd moved the ordering binder to clear a shelf, and behind it, shoved into the gap where the shelf met the wall, was a manila folder gone soft and gray with age. He almost didn't look inside it. It could have been anything: old invoices, tax forms, the junk that collects in the back of any office. But something made him open it, and when he saw what was there, he came out through the swinging door slower than Emily had ever seen him move, and he set the folder down on the counter in front of her without a word. "Miguel," she said, "what is it?" "It's got your name on it," he said quietly. "Look." And it did, right there on the tab, in faded blue ink, in handwriting that wasn't Derek's. Cartery. Emily's hand didn't want to open it. 2 years had taught her that a folder with her name on it in this office was never good news. It meant a write-up, a warning, a thing Derek had built to use against her later. But Jack was standing there, and Holloway and Sandra, and the whole room had gone quiet again the way it kept doing tonight, and so she opened it. And the first thing on top was a letter. Not from Derek. The handwriting was old-fashioned, careful, the loops of somebody who'd learned penmanship a long time ago. And at the top it said, "Dear Emily," and it was dated almost 3 years back, before Derek ever came, and it was signed at the bottom by a name she hadn't heard spoken in 2 years. Warren Foster, the old manager, the kind one, the one who'd gotten sick and had to leave right before Derek walked in and everything went dark.
What's time?
"Read it," Jack said, gently watching her face. "Whatever it is, you're not alone in the room this time." Emily's eyes moved down the page, and as they did, her lips parted and her hand came up to her mouth, and Jack watched a whole different kind of feeling wash over her. Not fear, not even the fragile hope from earlier, but something that looked almost like grief. "He knew," she whispered. "Mr. Foster, he knew he was leaving. He knew he was sick, and he wrote this before he went." "What's it say?" Sandra asked. Emily read it out loud, and her voice broke and steadied and broke again all the way through. It said that Warren Foster had watched Emily Carter for the 2 years she'd worked under him, and that she was the best natural worker he'd seen in 40 years in the restaurant business. It said she had the thing he'd never been able to teach a single soul: that she saw people. That she knew the trucker who needed his coffee left black, and the old widow who came in on Thursdays just so somebody would ask how she was, and that a girl who noticed that much could run any room in the country if she ever stopped believing she wasn't allowed to. It said he was sorry he was leaving before he could promote her himself, because that had been his plan. It said he'd already spoken to Mr. Holloway about her, recommended her for assistant manager, and that the paperwork was started. And it said at the very end, in that careful old-fashioned hand, "Don't let anybody who comes after me tell you what you are, Emily. I already know what you are. You just have to catch up to it." The room was dead silent. "He recommended me," Emily said. She was looking at Holloway now, and her voice had gone strange and small. 3 years ago, to you, for assistant manager." She lifted the letter with a shaking hand. "It says the paperwork was started, and Holloway had gone very pale. I never saw it, Holloway said. He said it slowly like a man walking backward through his own memory, checking each step. Warren called me. I remember it now. He called me when he got his diagnosis, told me he wanted to get some things in order before he left. He mentioned a girl, said she was special, said he was putting through a promotion and he wanted me to sign off. Holloway's jaw tightened. And then he got sicker faster than anybody thought. He was gone within the month. And there was so much to handle finding a new manager keeping the doors open. He stopped. The paperwork never crossed my desk. I assumed it never got finished. I forgot about it entirely. God help me, I forgot the girl even had a name. It got finished, Miguel said quietly. He was still holding the folder. He pulled out the second page and turned it around. Look, it's all here. Warren signed it. It just needed your signature at the bottom. He paused. There's a date stamp. Human Resources received it 3 years ago. Holloway stared at the page. Then why didn't it? He stopped. And everybody in the room arrived at the same place at the same moment, because there was only one answer, and it was standing 8 miles up the road in a gas station parking lot with a coffee can on the hood of his truck. Derek, Emily said. Derek, Jack agreed, and his voice had gone cold and flat as a winter road. Because here was the thing that had been sitting in that office folder for 2 years, poisoning everything, and nobody had known. When Derek Collins came in to take over a diner where the old manager had just recommended a waitress for a promotion, when he found a piece of paper that said, "This girl is special, this girl is going up, this girl already has one signature and needs only one more," a man like Derek didn't see good news. He saw a threat. He saw a girl who, if that paper ever got signed, would outrank his lies, would have a title and a voice in a direct line to the owner. So he buried it. He shoved it behind the ordering binder where nobody would ever look, and then he spent 2 years making absolutely certain that the girl in that folder never believed a single good word about herself, because a girl who knew she'd been called special by the man who trained her might have gone looking for the reason she never got the job she'd earned. He didn't just steal your tips, Jack said quietly. Emily, look at me. He stole your tips, and he stole your money, and he stole your name to a sheriff tonight. But that, he nodded at the folder, that's the thing he really stole. He stole 2 years you should have spent knowing what you were. He found a letter that told you the truth about yourself, and he hid it, and then he stood over you every single day, telling you the exact opposite, and he made you believe him. Jack's voice dropped. That's the cruelest thing in this whole building. Worse than the money. He robbed you of yourself. Emily was crying now, but silently, the old silent way, the tears just running down while her face stayed still, because that was the only way she'd been allowed to cry for 2 years, and her body hadn't learned yet that it was safe to make a sound. And then she read the last line again out loud in a whisper to nobody and everybody. Don't let anybody who comes after me tell you what you are. I already know what you are. You just have to catch up to it. I was talking about Derek, she said. Mr. Foster, he knew somebody was coming. He didn't know who, but he knew whoever it was might try to tell me what I was. And he tried to warn me from 3 years ago. Her voice cracked wide open. And I never got to read it. Derek made sure I never got to read it. For 2 years, I thought there was nobody. I thought nobody had ever once believed in me. And this whole time there was a letter 20 feet away that said the opposite, and he sat on it. Besame. That was the moment the grief turned into something else. Jack saw it happen. He'd seen it before in other people and himself once, a long time ago, the exact instant when a person stops being crushed by what was taken from them and starts instead to burn. Emily set the letter down on the counter. She wiped her face once with the back of her wrist, the same gesture she'd used all night to hide her tears. Except this time she wasn't hiding anything. She wiped her face clean and she looked up, and there was something new in her eyes, something that had not been there 2 hours ago when she'd trembled behind the coffee pot. Mr. Holloway, she said, that promotion, the one Mr. Foster started 3 years ago, is it still good? Holloway looked at her, and something in his face had shifted too, from guilt to a kind of quiet respect. Miss Carter, I offered you the whole diner an hour ago. Assistant manager's a step down from what's already on the table. I know, Emily said. I'm not asking to take the assistant job. I'm asking because I want Mr. Foster's signature on the wall of this diner. His and yours both on that paper he started dated when he started it. I want it framed. I want it hung by the register. Her chin came up. because he was the last person to run this place who thought it should be built on people instead of fear. And Derek spent 2 years trying to erase that, and I'm not going to let him. Not the letter and not the man. The first thing I do as manager is I put Warren Foster back on that wall. For a moment, nobody said anything. And then Sandra, 12-year Sandra, who'd been afraid to speak to the owner for a decade, made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh. And she said, "Warren would have loved that. Oh, honey, Warren would have loved that so much." "You knew him," Emily said. "I knew him for 9 years, Sandra said. "He hired me. He was the kindest man who ever ran a business. And when he got sick, we all just kind of scattered because it hurt too much. And then Derek came and it was like the light went out of the whole place. We stopped talking about Warren because Derek didn't like it. Anytime somebody mentioned the old days, he'd find a reason to cut their hours." She wiped her eyes. "He erased him. On purpose. Same as he erased you. And none of us even noticed it happening because that's how he did it, a little at a time, so slow you couldn't see it." "Well," Emily said, and her voice was steel now, steady steel. "We're going to notice it now, all of it, because I've been noticing things my whole life, Sandra. Mr. Foster said so himself. I noticed everybody in this diner for 2 years while I was too scared to speak. Now I'm going to notice out loud." Jack Walker stood back and watched it happen, and something loosened in his chest that had been tight since the moment he'd first seen that girl's handshake pouring coffee. Because this was the thing he'd been trying to reach all night. Not the money back, not Derek gone, not even the promotion. Those were all just the clearing of the ground. This right here, a woman who'd been convinced she was nothing standing in the wreckage of the machine that had convinced her, and choosing not just to rebuild, but to rebuild it better than it was, for this was the whole point. This was why he hadn't ridden away. But he also knew something else, standing there watching Emily's face harden into resolve. He knew that resolve at midnight in a room full of people who love you is easy. He knew the hard part comes later alone at 3 a.m, when Derek's voice comes back, because it would come back. It always came back for years, sometimes, whispering, "You're going to fail. You're not ready. You're going to prove me right." He knew the letter and the framed signature and the standing ovation would carry her for a while, and then one day they wouldn't, and she'd have to find something underneath all of it to stand on. So before the night was over, he pulled her aside, away from the others, over by the window. "You're going to have hard days," he said. "I need to tell you that now while it's good, so you're not blindsided when it comes." Emily looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Derek's gone, but he left a version of himself inside your head. 2 years worth. And that version doesn't leave when the man leaves. It's going to talk to you. Some morning a few weeks from now, an order's going to come in wrong, or a customer's going to yell, or the numbers won't add up, and you're going to hear his voice saying, 'See, you can't do this. You were never good enough.'" Jack held her eyes. "And on that day, the letter's not going to be enough. The signature on the wall's not going to be enough. You want to know what's going to be enough?" Emily nodded slowly. "You're going to remember tonight," Jack said, "not the part where everybody stood up for you. The other part, the part where you stood in front of the man who owned everything with your whole life on the line, and you called him wrong to his face when it would have been so much safer to shrink. Nobody made you do that. I didn't make you. The room didn't make you. That came from inside you, Emily, from a place Derek spent 2 years trying to reach and never could. He tapped his own chest once. That place is still there. It was there the whole time he was telling you it wasn't. On the bad mornings, that's what you reach for. Not the letter, that." Emily's eyes filled again, but she was smiling through it now. "How do you know all this?" she asked. "How do you know exactly what it's going to feel like?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, and then he told her the thing he'd only touched on earlier, the thing about the woman at the kitchen table. "My mother," he said, "the woman I mentioned, at the table with the smile she didn't mean." He looked out the window at the dark. "My father was a lot like Derek. Not the money part, we didn't have any money to steal, but the other part, the quiet part, the way he could walk into a room and make my mother go small without ever raising his voice. The way he made her believe a little at a time so slow you couldn't see it, that she was nothing without him, that nobody else would ever want her, that she couldn't survive on her own. She believed it," Emily said. "It wasn't a question." "She believed it for 22 years, Jack said. "And I was a kid, and then I was a teenager, and then I was a grown man. And the whole time I kept thinking, why doesn't she just leave? Why doesn't she see what he's doing? And it took me most of my life to understand she couldn't see it. Because when somebody says a thing to you every day for 22 years, it stops being his voice. It becomes the water you swim in. You don't question the water. You don't even know it's there. He turned back to her. I told you that earlier, and I could see you understood it, and that's how I knew. That's how I knew what he'd been doing to you, because I watched it done to somebody I loved for my whole childhood, and I couldn't do a single thing about it. What happened to her? Emily asked quietly. Jack was silent for a moment. She got out, he said. Eventually. Not because of me. I want to be honest about that because it matters. I didn't save her. For years, I thought if I just loved her enough, or got big enough, or made enough money, I could fix it. I couldn't. Nobody could from the outside. She got out because one day something inside her that he'd never quite managed to kill finally lifted its head, same as yours did tonight, and she looked at the water for the first time and understood it was drowning her. He nodded slowly. I just happened to be standing there when it happened. And I've spent 30 years riding around this country figuring out that the only thing you can do for somebody in that water, the only thing that actually works is not to reach in and pull. It's to remind them they know how to swim so that when the moment comes, they use it. Emily was crying openly now. No hiding it. That's what you said to me, she whispered. When you were talking to Holloway. You said somebody who survives what you survived already knows how to lead. Because it's true, Jack said. And because a long time ago, I wish somebody had said it to my mother about 20 years sooner. So now I say it every chance I get. To every person I find crying in silence in a diner off the highway. He put on the ghost of a smile. You're not the first, Emily. You won't be the last. But you're the one standing in front of me tonight. So it's you I get to say it to. The clock behind the counter said nearly 2 in the morning when Holloway finally gathered his coat to make the long drive back to Flagstaff. But before he left, he did one thing. He took the promotion letter, Warren Foster's letter, the one Derek had buried for 2 years, and he laid it flat on the counter, and he took a pen out of his coat pocket, and under Warren's signature from 3 years back, he signed his own name. There, he said quietly, 3 years late, but there. He slid it across to Emily. First thing your predecessor asked me for, and the first thing my new manager gets from me. Frame it, hang it by the register like you said, and every time you have one of those hard mornings, this man's warning you about, he nodded at Jack. You look at it, and you remember there were 2 managers who signed off on you before you ever believed it yourself. And one of them was dying when he did it, and he did it anyway because he was that sure. Emily took the letter in both hands. She didn't say thank you. She'd said thank you a dozen times that night, and it had stopped being big enough. Instead, she just held it, and she looked at Warren Foster's careful old-fashioned signature, and she looked at Holloway's beside it, and something in her went quiet and certain in a way it had never been in her whole life. I'm going to make it the best diner on this highway, she said. Not for you, Mr. Holloway, no offense, and not even for me. She looked up. For him, for Warren, because he was right about what a place like this should be built on, and Derek was wrong, and I get to be the one who proves it. Holloway smiled and put on his coat and went out into the dark, and this time the bell over the door didn't sound tired at all. And then it was just the night crew, Sandra and Miguel and Emily, and Jack, who'd finally at 2 in the morning been served the meatloaf he'd ordered at 9 fresh hot, made by Emily herself on the house with an egg on top, for no reason except that Miguel said that was how you thanked a man properly. He ate it slow. He'd earned the sitting still. 20 minutes he'd told himself hundreds of miles ago. It had turned into 5 hours, and it had turned his whole night inside out, and he wouldn't have traded it for anything. You should sleep, Emily told him, watching him eat. There's a motel 2 exits up, real beds. You've been on the road all day, and then you spent your whole night in here fixing my life. I didn't fix anything, Jack said around a mouthful of meatloaf. We've established this. You minded me I could, Emily said, smiling. Yeah, I heard you the first time. And they laughed, the 2 of them, and Sandra laughed, and Miguel came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands, and laughed too. And for a moment, the Silver Moon Diner at 2 in the morning was the warmest place in the whole dark desert. But Jack, forking up the last of the meatloaf, was thinking about the road again. He always thought about the road when a thing was finished. And this felt finished, the man gone, the money back. The letter found the promotion, signed, the girl standing on her own 2 feet at last. I was wrong, of course. There was one more thing coming that none of them saw. One more knock at that tired diner door before the sun came up. One more face out of Emily's past that would test everything she'd found in herself tonight. Because the money and the letter and the promotion had cleared away Derek Collins. But Derek Collins, it turned out, had never been the only shadow in Emily Carter's life. And the other one was about to walk in from the dark. The knock came just past 3. Not the bell over the door, a knock low and uncertain knuckles on glass. The kind of knock a person makes when they're not sure they should be knocking at all. Miguel had already flipped the sign to closed and killed half the lights. They were the only ones left, the 4 of them, sitting around the counter in the low glow, while Jack finished his coffee and Emily read Warren Foster's letter for maybe the 10th time. She looked up at the sound. So did Jack. "We're closed," Sandra called out, not unkindly. "Sorry, hun. Come back at 6. But the knock came again, and a voice came through the glass with it, a woman's voice, worn thin, hesitant. "I'm looking for Emily Carter. Please, I heard she works here." And Emily went very still. Jack watched it happen, watched every bit of the steadiness she'd found over the last 5 hours drain out of her in a single second. Watched her go right back to the girl who'd flinched at a gentle question behind the coffee pot. Whatever the last 5 hours had given her, this voice reached underneath all of it and touched something older. "Emily," Jack said quietly, "you know that voice?" Emily didn't answer. She was staring at the door like it might come off its hinges. "I know it," she finally whispered. "I haven't heard it in 11 years, but I know it." She stood up slow and she crossed to the door on legs that didn't seem to want to hold her, and she turned the lock and she opened it. And a woman stood there in the cold, maybe 50, thin, a face that had once been Emily's face before life got hold of it, holding a beat-up purse against her chest with both hands like a shield. "Hi, baby," the woman said, and her voice cracked all the way through. "It's Mom." Nobody in that diner breathed, because Emily had told Jack hours ago in the booth by the window one true thing about her family. She'd said, "My mom passed." And now here was a woman standing in the doorway calling her baby, and Jack watched Emily's face go through more feelings in 5 seconds than most people feel in a year's shock, in something like hope that got strangled before it could stand up, and then hardening over all of it, a cold and terrible confusion. "You're dead," Emily said, flat. "Aunt Ruth told me you died 11 years ago. She showed me there was a service. There was a..." Her voice climbed and broke. "I was 15. I stood at a funeral for you. What is this? What are you?" The woman, her mother, closed her eyes like the words were blows. "There wasn't a funeral, Emily," she said quietly. "There was a service, but it wasn't Ruth told you I died, because it was easier than telling you the truth. It was easier for everybody than telling a 15-year-old girl that her mother left." "Left," Emily repeated. "I got sick, baby. Not the kind of sick that kills you. The other kind." The woman's hands tightened on the purse. "I was drinking. I'd been drinking since your father took off, and it got bad, worse than you were old enough to see. And one day I looked at you, 15 years old, taking care of me, cooking my dinners, lying to your teachers about why I couldn't come in, and I knew I was drowning you. So I left you with Ruth, and Ruth was so angry at me, so ashamed of me, that she told everybody I was dead. Told you I was dead." Tears were running freely now. "And God forgive me, Emily, I let her, because I thought a dead mother was easier to grieve than a live one who abandoned you. I thought I was doing you a kindness." The diner was so silent Jack could hear the old refrigerator hum. And Emily Carter stood in the open doorway with the cold air pouring in, staring at a ghost who wasn't a ghost, and every single thing she thought she knew about her own life came apart in her hands. "Get out," Emily said. It came out barely above a whisper, but it landed like a shout. "Emily, I said get out." Her voice was shaking now, and Jack could hear that it wasn't rage, or wasn't only rage. It was something raw. The sound of a wound 11 years old getting torn open in a diner doorway at 3 in the morning. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to be dead for 11 years and then knock on a door at 3 a.m. and what? What do you even want? Why now? Why tonight of all the nights?" "Because I saw it," her mother said. Emily stopped. Saw what she said. The woman fumbled at her purse with shaking hands and pulled out a phone, an old cracked thing, and she held it up, and on the screen was a video paused. Jack couldn't see it well from where he sat, but he could see enough. He could see a grainy image of the inside of this very diner. He could see a leather vest. "It's all over the internet, baby," her mother said. Somebody was in here tonight, filming, when that man stood up for you. When you stood up to the manager and then to the owner and the whole room stood up with you. She was crying so hard now she could barely get it out. Somebody put it online a few hours ago. It's everywhere. Thousands of people are sharing it. And the title says a waitress named Emily Carter in Red Valley, Arizona. And I saw your name and I saw your face and Emily, her voice shattered completely. You're grown. You're so grown. And the last time I saw you, you were a little girl I was too sick to take care of. And now there's a whole room full of strangers standing up for you. And I wasn't one of them. I've never once been one of them. And I couldn't sit in that motel one more night knowing you were 40 miles away. And I'd never even... She stopped. I just wanted to see your face, she said. In person, one time, before I lose my nerve and disappear again, which is the only thing I've ever been any good at. And Emily Carter, who 2 hours ago had faced down a sheriff without her voice breaking, stood in that doorway and did not know what to do with her hands. Jack got up. He didn't say anything. He just moved quiet, and he came and stood a little behind Emily's shoulder. Not between her and her mother, just near the way he'd stood near her all night, so she'd know she wasn't in the water alone. And he did the only thing he'd learned in 30 years that ever helped. He didn't tell her what to feel. He didn't tell her to forgive or not to. He just said low only for her. You don't have to decide anything tonight. You don't have to fix 11 years standing in a doorway at 3 in the morning. You only have to decide one thing, he paused. Whether she comes in and gets warm or whether she goes back out in the cold, that's all. Just the next 5 minutes. Everything else can wait for daylight. Emily's throat worked. How do I even, she started. Jack, she was dead. For 11 years, she was dead. Do you understand what that? I grieved her. I grew up without her because a whole family decided it was kinder to bury her than to tell me the truth. And now she's just here. And she shook her head hard. I don't even know what she wants. I don't think she knows either, Jack said gently. I think she wanted to see your face and she didn't think past that. People like her. He chose the words carefully. People who've been drowning a long time, Emily, they don't plan. They just every so often come up for one breath of air, and this is hers. That doesn't mean you owe her anything. It doesn't mean you have to let her back in your life. It just means the woman on your doorstep is drowning too, same as you were an hour before I walked in. And you know better than anybody in this world what that costs. Emily turned and looked at him. That's not fair, she said. You can't use that. My whole thing, my whole night, you can't turn it around on me like that. I'm not turning anything, Jack said. I'm just telling you what I see. You get to do whatever you want with it. If you shut that door right now, I'll back you 100% and I'll never say another word about it. Some things don't deserve forgiveness. Some people don't. I'm not the one who gets to say whether she does. He held her eyes. I'm only saying an hour ago a man told a whole room you were nothing and you weren't. And now there's a woman on your step who spent 11 years believing she's nothing too. You're the only person alive who knows how wrong a thing like that can be. What you do with that is yours, but you should know you're holding it. Marker. Emily stood in the doorway for a long, long moment, and then she stepped back and she held the door open wider, and she said in a voice scraped down to almost nothing, "It's cold out there. Come in and sit down." Her mother made a sound like she'd been holding her breath for 11 years and could finally let it go. She came in slow, uncertain, purse still clutched to her chest, and she stopped just inside the door like she wasn't sure the floor would hold her. I'm not saying anything's okay, Emily said quickly before her mother could speak. I'm not saying I forgive you. I don't know if I do. I don't know if I ever will. I found out you were alive 4 minutes ago, and I'm barely standing up. Her voice cracked. But I'm not going to leave you out in the cold at 3 in the morning either. Because I spent 2 years in here being treated like I didn't matter. And tonight a stranger taught me that you don't have to become the thing that hurt you. She looked at Jack just for a second. So, sit down, I'll make coffee, and you're going to tell me the truth. The whole truth, all of it, no matter how bad. Because I've had enough lies about you to last a lifetime. And if you want even a chance at anything with me, it starts with never lying to me again. Do you understand? Her mother nodded, tears streaming. I understand. I swear to you. Never again. Sit down, Emily said again softer, and her mother sat. Sandra, who'd been frozen behind the counter this whole time, quietly got up and started a fresh pot of coffee without being asked, because that's what you do. And Miguel disappeared into the kitchen and came back a few minutes later with a plate of eggs and toast that he set down in front of the trembling woman without a word, because that's what you do too. You feed the hungry person in front of you. You keep them warm. You sort out the rest by daylight. And Jack Walker sat back down at the counter and watched a family that had been shattered for 11 years take its first uncertain step back toward each other over a plate of eggs at 3 in the morning. And he thought about his own mother and the years he'd spent wishing somebody had opened a door for her sooner. And something in his chest that had been clenched for 30 years eased just a little. Her mother's name was Diane. That was the first true thing Emily learned that she'd never known, or had known once as a child and lost in 11 years of thinking the woman was gone. Diane Carter. And over the next hour in the low light of the closed diner, Diane told her daughter the whole truth the way Emily had demanded, and it was every bit as bad as Emily had feared, and somehow in the telling, a little less unbearable than the silence had been. She told her about the drinking and how it started and how far it went. She told her about the night she left, how she'd stood in Emily's doorway watching her sleep, 15 years old, and already worn down from carrying a mother she should never have had to carry, and how she'd known in that moment that the kindest thing and the most cowardly thing were the same thing, and she'd done it anyway. She told her about Ruth's rage and the lie, and how she'd let it stand because a part of her believed she deserved to be dead to her own child. And she told her the part that Emily hadn't asked about but needed most to hear. I got sober, Diane said, 8 years ago, almost 8 years now. It doesn't undo anything. I know that I'm not stupid enough to sit here and think 8 years of sober fixes 11 years of gone. But I need you to know I didn't get sober and then just not come. I thought about you every single day. I drove to this town 4 separate times over the years, and I sat in the parking lot of wherever I heard you were, and every time I lost my nerve because I thought she thinks I'm dead, and a dead mother can't disappoint you again. A dead mother is safe. A live one who shows up and then can't handle it and vanishes again, that's the thing that would really break you. So I stayed away to protect you from me. Her hands twisted in her lap. And then tonight I saw that video, and I saw a whole room of strangers do the thing I'd been too much of a coward to do for 11 years, stand up for you. And I thought, if strangers can find the nerve, what's my excuse? What has my excuse ever been except fear? She looked up. So here I am, terrified. But here. Emily was quiet for a long time. You want to know the part that gets me, she finally said. It's not the leaving. I was 15. I understand more than you think about why a sick person does what they do. I just spent 2 years watching what fear makes people do. She swallowed. It's the 4 times. You sat in a parking lot 4 times and drove away. Do you know what I would have given any one of those 4 times to know you were alive? Do you know how many nights I lay awake missing a woman I thought was in the ground when you were sitting in a car 100 yards away, deciding I was better off without you? Her voice broke. You didn't get to make that choice for me, Mom. That was mine to make. Same as leaving me with Ruth was probably the right call, but telling me you were dead and then hovering at the edge of my life for 11 years too scared to knock, that wasn't protecting me. That was protecting you. Diane closed her eyes. You're right, she whispered. You're completely right. It was always protecting me. I dressed it up as protecting you because I couldn't stand to see myself clearly. She opened her eyes. That's the truth. That's the whole ugly truth. I was a coward and I called it love for 11 years. And something shifted in the room when she said it, because it was true and she said it plain without excuse. And there is a particular power in a person finally telling the truth about themselves with nothing left to gain. It was Jack, of all people, who broke the long silence that followed. Can I say something, he said, and then I'll butt out because this isn't mine and I know it isn't mine. Emily looked at him and nodded once. I had a mother a lot like you, Jack said to Diane. Not the drinking, but the drowning and the leaving she left too eventually, though it took her 22 years and it was a different kind of leaving. And I spent my whole childhood being the kid who took care of her, same as your daughter did, and I know exactly what that does to a person. I know that when you're the child who parents the parent, a piece of you never gets to be a kid, and you carry that your whole life. He looked at Emily, and I know it made her strong. It's part of why she could stand up the way she did tonight, because she'd been standing up for somebody since she was a little girl. But I also know it left a hole. A specific hole shaped exactly like a mother who was supposed to take care of her and didn't. He turned back to Diane. You can't fill that hole, he said. I want to be honest with you, because I think you've had enough people be gentle with you tonight, and what you need is somebody honest. You can't go back and be the mother she needed at 15. That window's closed. That girl grew up without you, and nothing you do now changes one day of it. He paused. But here's the thing I figured out too late with my own mother. You can't fill the old hole, but you can decide starting right now tonight whether you're going to be a person who shows up. Not a perfect one, not a fixed one, just one who shows up and keeps showing up even when it's hard, even when she doesn't want to see you, even when you sit in the parking lot terrified, you get out of the car anyway. Every single time, for however many years it takes. He leaned back. That's the only apology that ever means anything, not the words. The showing up, over and over until the showing up becomes the truth about you instead of the leaving. Diane was crying again but nodding, and Emily was looking at Jack with an expression he couldn't quite read. You keep doing that, she said quietly. Doing what? Talking about your mother like it's about her, Emily said. But it's not about her, it's about you. It's what you wish you could have said to her and can't because she stopped. She's really gone, isn't she? Your mom? Not a lie like mine. Really gone. Jack was quiet for a moment. 6 years now, he said, and there's a whole speech I never got to give her about showing up, about how the leaving didn't have to be the truth about her. He looked down at his coffee. So yeah, I guess I've been giving it to strangers in diners ever since. You caught me. And the strangest thing happened then. Emily Carter got up from the counter and crossed to where this frightening-looking biker sat in his Hells Angels vest, and she put her arms around him. This man she'd been terrified of 5 hours ago, and she hugged him hard the way you hug someone who's carried a thing alone for too long. Then this one's yours too, she whispered. Whatever happens with my mom, you showed up tonight for a stranger. That's the speech, Jack. That's you giving the speech with your whole life instead of your words. She'd have been proud of you. I don't have to have met her to know that. Jack Walker, who had faced down a manager and an owner and a sheriff without his voice ever once breaking, sat very still and let a stranger's daughter hug him in a closed diner at 4 in the morning. And for the first time in 6 years, something behind his eyes went wet. They stayed until the sun came up. Not because anything got fixed. Jack had been right about that. Nothing gets fixed in a night, and Emily was careful to say, so careful not to promise her mother anything she couldn't deliver. But by the time the first gray light came into the windows, they'd arrived at something. Not forgiveness, a door left open. Diane would come back to the diner in daylight as a customer at first, and they'd see. They'd go slow. Emily would set the pace, and her mother would show up when Emily said to, and stay away when Emily said to, and prove herself with time instead of words, exactly like Jack had said. I can't promise you a daughter, Emily told her at the door as the sun came up. I don't know if I've got one in me to give you. 11 years is a lot, Mom, but I can promise you a table. You want to be in my life, you start by being a person who comes to my diner and sits at my table and lets me get to know who you are now, sober, honest, for real. And we build from there, or we don't. But it'll be true this time. No matter what it is, it'll be true. Diane took her daughter's hand, didn't hug her, didn't push, just held her hand for a second at the door. A table's more than I deserve, she said. It's 1,000 times more than I deserve. Thank you, baby. And she went out into the morning, and this time Emily watched her go without the door feeling like a wound. Jack was gathering his gloves for real now. The night was over, the sun was up. Somewhere out on the highway his Harley was waiting, and the road always called loudest in the morning. He'd stayed longer than he'd stayed anywhere in years, and it was time the way it was always eventually time. You're leaving, Emily said. It wasn't a question. I'm leaving, Jack said. You don't need me anymore, Emily. You didn't really need me at all. I keep telling you that, and you keep not believing me, but it's true. You just needed somebody to ask the right question at the right moment. And after tonight, he nodded toward the door her mother had left through. After tonight, I think you've got your own questions to ask now. Your own people to say the speech to. He smiled. You're going to be somebody's biker in a diner someday. Somebody crying in silence. And you're going to walk over and ask who did this to you, and you're going to remember exactly how it felt to be asked. That's how it goes. That's how it's always gone. Emily's eyes filled. Again. She cried more tonight than in the last 2 years combined, and every time it had been the kind that means the thing that was frozen is finally thawing. At least let me feed you a proper breakfast before you go, she said. As the manager, my first official act. Jack laughed. You already fed me meatloaf at 2 in the morning. That was Emily the waitress, she said. This is Manager Carter. And Manager Carter does not let a man ride off on an empty stomach after he spent all night giving away his own mother's speech to strangers. She was already moving behind the counter. Sit down, Jack. 1 more hour, the road will still be there. And Jack Walker, who'd walked into the Silver Moon Diner 12 hours ago, wanting nothing but a quiet meal and 20 minutes of sitting still, looked at the girl who was now a manager in a diner that was now hers with a mother back from the dead and a whole different life spreading out in front of her. And he did the thing he'd done all night. He sat back down, because some breakfast you don't ride away from. The breakfast turned into the longest goodbye of Jack Walker's life, because just as he was finally actually reaching for his gloves, the phone behind the counter rang again. Emily froze the same way she had the night before. Old reflexes die slow. But this time Jack watched her catch herself, watched her take a breath, square her shoulders, and reach for the phone like a manager, instead of flinching from it like a victim. Silver Moon, this is Emily. She listened, and her face changed. Slow down, she said. Who is this? A pause. Okay, Kayla, I remember you. Yeah, I heard about you last night. Actually, Jack mentioned. She stopped, listened harder, and Jack, who had gone still at the name Kayla, watched something cross Emily's face that he hadn't seen there yet. Not fear, not grief, alarm. Wait, Emily said. Say that again. He's where? She set the phone down, slow. That was Kayla, she said. One of the girls who left. One of the ones you called last night, Jack. She saw the video too. Everybody's seen the video by now. And she called to tell me something. Emily's jaw tightened. Derek's not gone. Not the way we thought. He's 40 miles east at the truck stop where Carla works. And he's been there since about 4 this morning, drinking, telling anybody who'll listen that a criminal biker gang and a lying waitress destroyed his life and framed him for stealing. She looked up, and Carla's working the morning shift, alone, and he knows she's one of the ones who talked. The warmth went out of the room. He not going to do anything, Sandra said, but she didn't sound sure. He's all talk. He was always all talk. That's the whole thing about him. He never actually had to, Jack said quietly, and he was already standing up and the gloves were going on for a different reason now. That's not the same as him not being able to. A man like Derek runs on fear and control. Last night we took both away from him in front of the whole world. That video's got what did Kayla say? How many people watching? Hundreds of thousands, Emily said. By this morning, it's everywhere. Then he's the most humiliated man in this county right now, Jack said. And he's drunk and he's 40 miles from here, sitting across a counter from a woman he blames for it. That's not all talk. That's a fuse. He was moving toward the door. Emily, call Carla. Tell her to lock the register, keep people around her, and not be alone with him for 1 second. Then call that sheriff from last night, the one who believed you. Tell him where Derek is and what he's saying. He glanced back. I'm going to go stand next to Carla until the law gets there. I'm coming with you, Emily said instantly. No, Jack said, you're not. Jack, you've got a diner full of people about to come in for breakfast, a mother who's going to walk back through that door any day now, and a whole new life that starts this morning. He met her eyes. You don't need to go stand in front of Derek Collins again to prove anything. You already beat him last night, in front of the world. Standing in that truck stop wouldn't make you braver. Emily, it had just put you back in a room with a man you already climbed out from under. Let me do this one. This is the part I'm actually good at. A ghost of a smile. Standing between scared people and the thing that scares them. It's about the only skill I've got. But Emily Carter had spent 2 years being told where she was and wasn't allowed to go, and something in her had decided sometime around 3 that morning that those days were finished for good. You're right that I don't need to prove anything, she said. You're wrong about the rest. She was already grabbing her keys. Carla is one of the women who stood up when it counted. She talked to your friend last night, knowing exactly what it might cost her. And now she's alone behind a counter with the man she was brave enough to talk about, and you want me to stay here and butter toast?" She shook her head. "No, you taught me something last night, Jack, whether you meant to or not. You said someday I'd be somebody's biker in a diner. Somebody crying in silence, and I'd walk over and ask the question." Her chin came up. "Well, Carla's not crying in silence. She's about to have a drunk man make a scene at her alone because she was brave for me. I'm not gonna sit here and let her be alone for it. Sandra can open the diner. Miguel can run the floor. That's what managers do. They trust their people and they show up where they're needed." She looked him dead in the eye. "And right now I'm needed 40 miles east. So either you drive me or I follow you, but I am going." Jack looked at her for a long moment, and then slowly something that was almost pride settled over his hard face. "Warren Foster," he said quietly, knew exactly what he was talking about. "Get in the truck," Emily said. "You can philosophize on the way." They didn't take the Harley. Sandra had an old pickup out back and pressed the keys into Emily's hand, and Jack folded himself into the passenger seat, and Emily drove those 40 miles faster than she'd ever driven anything, one hand on the wheel and one hand on the phone, staying on the line with Carla the whole way. And through the phone, Jack could hear it building. He could hear Derek's voice in the background, slurred, rising that soft, controlled menace of his gone loose and ugly with liquor and humiliation. He could hear him working the small crowd of truckers and travelers at the counter telling his version, the one where he was the victim, the one where a gang and a liar had taken everything from an honest working man. And he could hear Carla steady but scared, telling him quietly that he needed to leave, that she'd called her manager that he couldn't be back here. And then he heard the thing that made his blood run cold. He heard Derek say Carla's name. Just her name. Soft. The old way. Carla. The way he'd said Emily's name across a counter the night before. The voice of a man who had spent his whole life making women go small by saying their name a certain way, and who had one weapon left and had just reached for it. "He's cornering her," Jack said. "Drive faster." "I'm going as fast as this thing goes." "Then keep her talking," Jack said, taking the phone. Carla, it's Jack. From last night, the friend. Listen to me. You're doing everything right. Keep people around you. Do not go anywhere alone with him. Not the back, not the office, nowhere. You hear me? Stay where the truckers can see you." Through the phone feint, "He says he just wants to talk. He says if I just talk to him for 1 minute, he'll leave. Jack, he's crying now. He's saying his whole life is over. He's saying..." "That's the most dangerous he gets," Jack said fast and low. "A man like that, when the mask comes all the way off and he's got nothing left, that's not the safe moment, Carla. That's the one you watch out for. Do not fall for the crying. The crying is the last tool in the box. Stay put. We're 12 minutes out." And then through the phone, Jack heard glass break and a woman's short scream, and the line went dead. Emily's foot went down. Neither of them said anything for the next several minutes. There was nothing to say. Emily drove and Jack sat with the dead phone in his hand and his jaw set like stone, redialing, getting nothing. And the desert scrolled past the windows and the truck stop got closer, one terrible mile at a time. "He wouldn't," Emily finally said. Her knuckles were white on the wheel. "Jack, he's a coward. Cowards don't. The whole thing about him is that he uses fear. He doesn't..." "I know," Jack said. "I know what he is. But I also know what a coward does when you take away the fear he lives on and leave him with nothing." He looked at her. "You want the truth? I don't know what he'll do. That's exactly why we drive fast, because I'd rather be wrong and standing there than right and 11 minutes late." They came off the highway into the truck stop lot, and Emily hadn't even fully stopped the truck before Jack was out the door. But it wasn't what either of them had braced for, because there was a small crowd outside the truck stop. Doors, truckers, mostly big men in flannel and caps, and they were standing in a loose ring around something, and at the center of the ring was Derek Collins, on the ground, not hurt, just sitting on the pavement with his back against the brick, holding his own bleeding hand where he'd apparently put it through the glass door and sobbing, really sobbing, the ugly kind, the kind that has no dignity left in it at all, while a couple of the truckers stood over him, not touching him, just making very sure he wasn't going anywhere until the sheriff came. And in the doorway, unharmed, shaken but standing, was Carla. She'd locked herself behind the counter, She'd kept the truckers around her exactly like Jack said. And when Derek had finally lunged drunk, desperate out of tools, he'd only made it as far as the glass door before three truck drivers who'd been listening to his whole ugly story decided they'd heard enough and stood up all at once the way a room full of scared people had stood up the night before. Han hadn't laid a hand on her. He'd broken a door with his fist and fallen apart on the pavement, and that was all his big, terrible threat had ever amounted to in the end. Emily reached Carla first. The two women held on to each other in the doorway, and Carla was shaking and Emily was saying, you're okay, I've got you," over and over the words she'd needed somebody to say to her for 2 years and had never heard until last night now, coming out of her own mouth for somebody else. And Jack stood back and watched her do it and thought, there it is. There's the thing I promised her she'd become. 12 hours. It only took 12 hours. Then Jack walked over to the man on the pavement. Derek looked up at him through his sobbing, and there was nothing left in his face at all. No mask, no menace, no soft, controlled cruelty. Just a small, drunk, broken man sitting in his own blood on the concrete at the absolute bottom of a life he'd spent making other people feel small. You, Derek said, you did this. You walked in and you took everything I... No, Jack said, and he crouched down so he was level with him, and his voice wasn't cruel and it wasn't kind. It was just true. I didn't take a single thing from you, Derek. I want you to hear that because I think it's the only thing that might ever save you, and I don't think anybody else is ever going to bother to say it to you. He looked him in the eye. Everything you lost, you built the machine that lost it for you. The tips, the lust, the fear, the letter, you buried all of it. You did that brick by brick over 2 years. You built a thing that was always going to come down. The second one person wasn't scared anymore. I didn't push it over. I just happened to be the one who asked the question. It was already falling. It's been falling since the day you shoved that folder behind the binder. Derek's face crumpled. I didn't have anything else, he said, and it came out small and awful and honest. You don't get it. The fear was it was the only thing I ever had that worked. It's the only way I ever knew how to matter. Take that away and he gestured at himself at the blood, the pavement, the ring of disgusted strangers. I'm this. This is what's under it. There was never anything under it but this. And Jack Walker looked at the man for a long moment, and something in his face that might have been hatred, if he'd been a smaller man, settled instead into something closer to pity. Yeah, he said quietly. I know, that's the saddest thing about men like you. You spend your whole life making other people feel like nothing because you're terrified that's what you are. And the cruelest part is, he stood back up, you're the only one who ever really believed it. Emily never believed she was nothing, not all the ways down, no matter how hard you worked at it. Neither did Carla. Neither did any of them. The only person you ever fully convinced, he looked down at the wreck on the pavement, was you. He turned and walked back toward the women. Behind him, he heard the sheriff's car pull into the lot. He didn't look back. Derek Collins was the law's problem now, and the law's alone, and Jack Walker was done with him for good. The sheriff took Derek away in the back of the car, and it turned out the broken door and the lunge at Carla, in front of a dozen witnesses, had accomplished the one thing 2 years of quiet cruelty never could. It had put him somewhere he could actually be held accountable. The tip theft would take investigators and paperwork and time. But you couldn't talk your way out of a broken door and a room full of truckers who'd watched you go for a woman. Derek had spent his whole life avoiding the one moment where his actions were finally too loud to deny. And this morning, drunk and desperate, he'd walk straight into it. Carla wouldn't stop thanking them. She thanked Emily for driving 40 miles, and she thanked Jack for the phone call that kept her behind the counter. And Emily kept telling her to stop, that she'd have done the same, that was the whole point. That's what they were now. All of them, the women who'd stopped being alone. And somewhere in the middle of it, Carla said the thing that would matter later. You know what got me through it, she said, wiping her eyes. The whole time he was cornering me, I kept thinking about that video, you, standing up to him. I kept thinking Emily did it. Emily was more scared than me, and she did it anyway in front of everybody. And I thought, if she can, I can. I just have to hold on till help comes. She laughed shaky. You saved me, and you weren't even here yet. You saved me last night in that video before I ever knew I'd need saving. And Emily understood, standing in that parking lot, the thing Jack had been trying to tell her all night. It doesn't stop with you. When somebody stands up for you and you find your feet, you don't just get to stand, you become the reason the next person can. The whole thing moves outward person to person, a stranger asking a question in a diner, becoming a video, becoming a woman holding on behind a counter 40 miles away. It never stops. It was never supposed to stop. She looked at Jack. He was watching her, and she could tell he saw that she'd finally fully understood. Yeah, he said before she could say anything. That's it. That's the whole thing. Now you know why I never really leave. Because it's not one girl in one diner. It never was. They drove back slower than they'd come. The sun was fully up now, and the desert was gold with it, and Emily drove with both hands easy on the wheel, and Jack rode beside her with his arm out the window, and neither of them said much for a while. There was a peace in the truck cab that neither of them wanted to break. Can I ask you something? Emily finally said. You can ask. Last night, when you first walked in, when you saw my hands shaking, pouring your coffee, she glanced over. You could have just eaten your meatloaf and left. Hundreds of people ate their meals in that diner over 2 years and saw exactly what you saw and did exactly that. Nothing. Earl saw it. The Hendersons saw it. Good people, decent people, and they all just looked away because it wasn't their business or because it was easier or because they told themselves I was probably fine. She shook her head. Why didn't you? What made you the one who asked? Jack was quiet for a long time. Because I already know what it costs to look away, he finally said. That's the difference. It's the only difference, Emily. Those good people looking away, they didn't know. They didn't know what it does to a person on the other side of the counter to be seen and passed over one more time. They didn't know what it does to you, the one looking away 30 years down the road, to know you saw somebody drowning and finished your dinner. He looked out at the desert. I know. I learned it at 7 years old at a kitchen table. I've carried it my whole life. And I decided a long time ago that I was never going to add one more face to the list of people I saw drowning and did nothing about. That's all it is. It's not courage. It's not being a good man. It's just I already paid the price for looking away once before I was even old enough to help. So I don't do it anymore. I can't afford it. It costs me more than it costs you. Emily drove for a while. Your mom, she said gently, the one you couldn't save, the speech you never got to give. Yeah, you gave it last night, Emily said. You know that, right? Not to a stranger. To me, sure, and to my mom. But really, she kept her eyes on the road, giving him the privacy of not being looked at. Really, you gave it to her, every word. Standing in my diner at 4 a.m, you finally got to say the whole thing out loud. And even if she couldn't hear it, I did. And my mom did, and it landed. It went somewhere, it changed something. That speech isn't stuck inside you anymore, Jack. You set it loose last night. It's out in the world now, doing what you always wanted it to do. She swallowed. I just thought you should know that, in case you didn't. Jack Walker looked out the window for a long, long time, and Emily let him, and the desert rolled by gold and endless, and when he finally spoke, his voice wasn't entirely steady. No, he said. I didn't know that. Thank you for saying it. Thank you for asking who did this to me, Emily said. We're even. The diner was full when they got back. Word travels fast in a small town and faster on the internet. And by mid-morning, the Silver Moon Diner had more customers in it than it had seen in a year. Some had come because of the video. Some had come out of plain curiosity. But a lot of them, Emily could tell, moving in through the room, a lot of them had just come because something good had happened in their forgotten little town in the middle of the desert. And people are drawn to good things the way they're drawn to warmth, and they wanted to stand near it for a while. Sandra had the floor running like she'd been managing her whole life. Miguel was working the grill with a joy Emily had never seen in him, calling out orders, cracking jokes, a man who'd finally been let out from under a shadow. And when Emily walked in, the whole diner, regulars and strangers alike, turned and looked at her, and this time it wasn't the fearful heads-down non-look of the night before. This time they looked right at her, and a few of them started to clap, and then more, and then all of them. Emily Carter stood in the doorway of the diner that was now hers in front of a room full of people who were on their feet applauding, and she did not shrink from it, and she did not cry, and she did not look for the exit. She just smiled, a real one, the kind that made it all the way up to her eyes, and she said loud enough for the whole room to hear, okay, sit down, all of you. Coffee's on the house this morning, and if Miguel's eggs are as good as everybody's about to find out, you're all going to be regulars, whether you like it or not." And the room laughed and sat, and the Silver Moon Diner came back to life all at once, in a single morning the way a thing does when the fear finally leaves it. Jack stayed one more day. He helped Emily hang the letter, Warren Foster's letter, with both signatures now framed and mounted on the wall right beside the register, where every single person who paid their check would see it. Emily added a small brass plate underneath it, and she wouldn't tell Jack what it said until it was up, and when it was, he read it, and he had to look out the window for a minute. It said, "This diner is built on people, not fear, WF." He'd have liked that, Jack said when he could talk. "I know," Emily said. "That's why it's there." And the next morning, for real this time, Jack Walker rolled his Harley out of the lot as the sun came up. Emily walked out to see him off. She wasn't the trembling girl who'd flinched at a question anymore, and they both knew it, and there was a kind of ease between them that only comes from having gone through fire together in a single unforgettable night. "You saved me," she said. "I know you keep saying you didn't, but I need to say it out loud one time, and I need you to just let me. You saved my life, Jack, not just from Derek. From 2 years of believing I was nothing. From maybe a whole lifetime of it. You saved me." And Jack Walker, sitting on his bike in the morning light, shook his head slow, the same as he'd shaken it a dozen times that night. "I didn't save you, Emily," he said. "You want to know the truth? You want the real, honest, whole truth of it?" He looked at her. "You were never drowning. That's what nobody, including you, ever understood. You were holding your breath. 2 years you held your breath waiting, not for somebody to pull you out. You didn't need pulling out. Just for somebody to tell you it was safe to come up for air." He smiled. "That's all I did. I told you it was safe. You did every single bit of the rest. The standing up, the truth-telling, the driving 40 miles for Carla, the coffee on the house, all of it. That was you. It was always going to be you. I just happened to be the one who walked in on the right night and said the word out loud." Emily's eyes filled, but she was smiling. "Then I'll do the same," she said. "For the next one, whoever they are, whatever diner, I'll be the one who walks in on the right night and tells them it's safe to come up." "I know you will," Jack said. "That's the whole reason it works." He pulled his gloves on. He kicked the Harley to life, and the engine filled the morning with that deep, familiar thunder and the sound of it wasn't frightening anymore. Not to Emily, not to anyone in Red Valley. It had become the sound of the morning stranger rode into their forgotten town and reminded a whole diner full of people what they were. "Take care of them," Jack said, nodding at the diner, at the lights coming on, at Sandra flipping the sign to open, and Miguel firing up the grill and pulling into the lot. Just then an old car with a nervous woman behind the wheel who'd promised to come back and was keeping her promise, one showing up at a time. "I will," Emily said. "Take care of yourself, Jack." And she stopped him, one hand on the warm metal of the bike. "The next crying person you find in some diner off some highway, when you ask them who did this to them and you tell them it's safe to come up for air." She held his eyes. "Tell them about a diner in Red Valley, Arizona. Tell them about the girl who used to cry in silence and runs the whole place now. Tell them it's real. Tell them it happened. Because somewhere out there right now, there's somebody holding their breath, thinking they're the only one, thinking nobody's coming, and I need them to know we're real. I need them to know it works." Jack Walker looked at her for a long moment. "I'll tell every one of them," he said. "I promise you that." And then he rode away east into the rising sun, the thunder of the engine fading down the long empty highway until it was just a whisper, and then not even that. Emily Carter stood in the lot of the diner that was hers and watched him go until she couldn't see him anymore. Behind her, her mother was getting out of her car, uncertain, keeping her promise. Inside, Sandra was pouring coffee, and Miguel was singing over the grill, and Warren Foster's letter hung on the wall, catching the morning light. And the sign that had barely worked for years, the faded old Silver Moon sign, glowed steady and bright against the desert sky. She had come up for air, and she was never going back under, because a stranger had once ridden in off the highway and asked a broken girl one quiet question, and the answer to that question had rebuilt an entire life. Hers and Carla's and Sandra's and Miguel's, and one day her mother's, and someday somewhere the life of a person she would never meet, crying in silence in a diner off some other highway, waiting for someone to walk over and say the words. And Emily Carter would be the one to say them. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. One person choosing not to look away is enough to change everything. And justice does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives on a Harley Davidson, asks a single question, and rides away at dawn, leaving behind something far greater than it ever took a person who finally knows exactly what she is. Viet Tim Duan Kui Won Chut Nua. 1 year later, the Harley came back. Emily heard it before she saw it, that deep, unmistakable thunder rolling in off the highway, a sound that no longer belonged to fear in Red Valley, but to something closer to hope. She was behind the counter when it reached her, and she set down the coffee pot, and she smiled before she even turned around because she knew. Some engines you don't forget. The Silver Moon Diner was a different place now. Every booth was full. The cracked vinyl had been replaced, but Emily had kept one booth by the window exactly as it was, splits him in all with a little brass plate that said, "Reserved," and nobody ever sat there, except the man it was reserved for on the rare days he passed through. Jack Walker came through the door, a year older, a little more silver at the temples, and the bell overhead gave a bright, clean chime. Emily had fixed it herself months ago because she couldn't stand for it to sound tired anymore. He stopped just inside and looked around at the full room, the warm light, the letter on the wall, and the young woman coming out from behind the counter, who did not look anything at all like the girl he'd found crying in silence a year before. "Well," Jack said, "look at this place." "Look at it," Emily agreed, and then she crossed the room and hugged him, and this time there was nothing fragile in it at all. She sat him down at his booth and brought him coffee, black, and a fresh meatloaf, with an egg on top before he could order a thing because Miguel had seen him come in and started it the second the door chimed. And Emily slid into the seat across from him, the same seats where the whole thing had started, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the biker and the manager, a year and a whole lifetime, apart from the night that made them. "My mom comes in every Thursday," Emily said. 2 years sober now. She shows up. Every single time. You were right, it was never the words, it was the showing up. She smiled. "We're not fixed, but we're real. We're getting somewhere true. And Carla works here now. So does Kayla. I hired back every one of the women. Derek ran off the ones who'd have me." Emily's chin lifted, that quiet steel he'd first seen a year ago now, just a permanent part of her. Turns out a diner built on people instead of fear is a pretty good place to work. Who knew? Jack laughed and ate his meatloaf, and for a while it was just the two of them and the warm noise of a full room, and neither needed to fill the quiet. Then Emily said, "You still doing it out there, finding the ones crying in silence?" Jack set down his fork. "Found one 3 weeks ago," he said. "Diner outside Tucson. Young guy this time, busboy. Couldn't have been 20 boss riding him like Derek rode you. Everybody looking away." He met her eyes. "I asked him the question." "And you know what I told him after?" Emily shook her head. "I told him about a diner in Red Valley, Arizona," Jack said quietly. "I told him about a girl who used to cry where nobody could hear, who runs the whole place now. I told him it was real, that it happened, that it works." He smiled. "He didn't believe me. They never do at first. So I gave him the address. Told him if he ever got out, he should ride up and see it with his own eyes." The bell over the door chimed, then bright, clean, unhurried. And a young man stood in the doorway, maybe 20, thin, uncertain, a duffel bag over one shoulder, like somebody who'd finally left something behind. He looked around the full, warm room like he wasn't sure he was allowed inside it. Emily was already on her feet. "That'd be him," Jack said softly, not turning around. "Told you. They come up for air eventually, every time." And Emily Carter walked across the diner that was hers toward the frightened young man in the doorway, and she did not hurry, and she did not shrink, and she wore the smile that made it all the way up to her eyes. "Hi," she said. "You must be looking for me. Come on in. Sit down. Coffee's on the house." She put a hand on his shoulder, gentle, the way somebody once should have done for her. "You made it. That's the hardest part, and you already did it. The rest we figure out together." Behind her, Warren Foster's letter caught the morning light on the wall. Jack Walker watched from his booth with wet eyes and a full heart, and understood that he could ride away today for the last time, and it wouldn't matter because it didn't live in him anymore, or even in Emily. It lived in the room now, in the walls, in every person who'd come up for air here and stayed to help the next one do the same. Some things, once you set them loose, never stop. And the Silver Moon Diner glowed against the desert like a light left on for anyone still out there in the dark, holding their breath, waiting to be told the one thing that changes everything: it's safe now. You can come up.